Quickly, I will turn things over to Paul Whalen so that we can start the proceedings. Thank you again for joining us and welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Bill. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us today as the Soane Foundation presents a dear friend who will speak about the remarkable efforts she has overseen on the restoration of one of the most hallowed spaces at the Soane Museum. I'm Paul Whalen, chairman of the Sir John Soane's Museum Foundation in New York. And on behalf of my fellow trustees, we are honored to have Helen Dorey offer a look into the history and recent restoration of the museum's drawing office. In many ways, the drawing office is the heart and soul of the Soane Museum, where Sir John trained and guided his architectural team of young architects and students in his creative vision. Joining us from our office in London, Helen Dorey is the Deputy Director and Inspectress of Sir John Soane's Museum. She is a member of the Council of the Society of Architectural Historians of Great Britain, Chairman of the Scholarship Committee of Addingham Trust, and member of the National Trust Collection and Interpretation Advisory Group. At the Soane, she is responsible for the collections and their conservation and authentic display in the interiors at 13 Lincoln's Inn Fields, which are preserved as they were left by the founder in 1837. For 35 years, Helen has researched and overseen the restoration of the museum, working with the director and Julian Harrop architects. She has published widely on the Soane's collections of furniture, stained glass, sculpture, models, and paintings. Before turning the proceedings over to Helen, I'd like to briefly take a moment to announce our final program of the season, coming up on June 15th at noon Eastern Time. Mark your calendars with that date. Jerome Tryon, the Soane Foundation Museum Fellow in 2021, will present a talk about his experiences working at the museum. Jerome will offer a personal view on how the museum has influenced his work as an artist and as an architect. The restoration of the drawing office and museum fellowship are two of the ways that the foundation helps to support the work that Helen oversees, and we thank all of you for your support in making these and other activities possible. To learn more about the foundation, please follow us on Instagram or visit our website where you can donate in support of programs like these. After Helen's talk, I will return on camera, and please for Q&A, and please do submit your questions in the Q&A field at the bottom of your screen throughout the program, and we will try to get to as many of you as we can. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Helen Dorey, who will enlighten us all on inhabiting the Soane, a look into its history and the recent restoration of Soane's drawing office. Welcome, Helen. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that lovely and generous introduction. And of course, huge thanks to the Foundation for the support that you've given to this restoration project. I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you about the drawing office. And I know that many of my colleagues and old friends are with us on this Zoom call. I wish I could see you all in person, especially the New Yorker who told me he was planning his wardrobe for the occasion very carefully. I hope that many of you will be able to come and see the drawing office for yourselves in due course. And when you do, you will be very warmly welcomed in Lincoln's Inn Fields. I chose my title, Inhabiting Soane's Office, deliberately as a sort of double entendre, because I'm going to cover two aspects of John Soane's drawing office. Firstly, its history and its function as a working space in his time, how his pupils inhabited it. And secondly, our restoration, which involved our needing to truly inhabit this small and complex space in order to understand it, restore it, and to allow others to inhabit it in future. This view shows the space as it looked some years before we started our project in January 2021 on site, but that's a bit of a teaser. Back to the history. Next, please, Bill. Thank you for operating my images. On the left here is Soane's house and museum at 13 Lincoln's Inn Fields, where he housed his collection and ran his practice from 1813 until his death in 1837. When he died, he left his home to the nation asking that it be kept as nearly as possible as it was at that time. And on the left here, you see the facade, and on the right, a portrait of Soane by William Owen in 1805. It's a particular favourite of mine because it shows him as a working architect, with a book open on his knee, a bulging portfolio by his chair, and in the background, more books and an ink pot and quill in a writing box. Soane set up in independent architectural practice in 1780 to 81 after his return to London following a 2-year grand tour funded by a scholarship from King George III through the Royal Academy. When he came back to London, he lived in rented accommodation at 53 Margaret Street off Cavendish Square, and he worked from home, as so many of us do today. In 1783, he moved to a larger house in Same Street near Cavendish Square. For those of you who know London, that's just behind John Lewis, Oxford Street. And in 1784, he married an heiress and he took on his first pupil, John Sanders. And John Sanders lived in and took his meals with the Soane family. Soane moved again twice, always combining living and working at the same address, before he moved to Lincoln's Inn Fields in 1792. Next, please. In that year, Soane bought his first house at number 12 Lincoln's Inn Fields, and you can see a plan of it on the screen here. He pulled down the property completely and rebuilt it as a combined home and office. For the first time, he was able to design his own working space, pulling down stables at the back of the property to build the office. His preoccupations were those that any architect would have, primarily the layout of the desks and the presses for drawing storage. This plan is dated October the 15th, 1792. You can see the complete plan on the left with the office at the top of it. It's a ground floor plan, and the office is on the north side of the building with, as you can see, its own separate entrance to the little Mews Street that runs along at the back. In the detail on the right, you can see, again, the plan of the office in particular, showing what's described as a double table in the centre and, quote, the drawing tables against the back north wall. This plan has been scrawled over by Soane in his own distinctive hand with further ideas for a modified layout. Clearly, the design is still evolving. It appears that the office here is envisaged as a single space at the back of the house. Sadly, this is the last dated plan we have, and there are no other plans recording its final layout. Next, please. However, we do have views of that first office made in 1808 that reveal how it looked as built. This is an east-west section looking north, with a cupboard and presses against the north wall and a number of casts hanging there, including a series of small variations on the Greek key, an essential part of the repertoire of any neoclassical architect, as well as a large relief of Minerva in the centre of the wall, still in our collection. This view doesn't show those long drawing tables along the north wall that we saw on the plan. This is explained by the title of the drawing, which reads Section of the Lower Office, and the presence of a small staircase on the right of the drawing, clearly leading to an upper office above this one. 2 offices, a lower office and an upper office, is also the form of Soane's later office arrangement at number 13, as we shall see. We don't have any views or plans of the upper office behind number 12, but we can assume something about it, which is that the drawing tables must have been in it upstairs, where they could enjoy good north light, as in Soane's later office. So they have moved since that early plan. Next, please. This is the second view of that office, dated July the 20th, 1808. So beautifully drawn, such a wonderful light, and providing further detail of what this lower office behind number 12 looked like. It shows the stove that warmed Soane's pupils. This is a conventional space with solid walls that could accommodate flues. It also shows on the right light flooding down to illuminate the casts hanging on the north wall from what is clearly an aperture in the floor of the upper office above. In the 1790s, as you can see here, Soane was already beginning to build up his collection of casts after antique and Renaissance originals, and to use them as a repertoire of ornament and a tool in the training of his pupils. All the casts that you see in this view can be identified in his collection today. Next, please. In this view of Soane's breakfast room at number 12 from 1796, looking north over the central courtyard outside the window, we can glimpse the exterior of the office through the greenery of Soane's roof garden. It's worth noting that Soane himself doesn't work in the office. His pupils work there under the supervision of a chief clerk. Soane has his desk here in his breakfast room, close to the tea table where his wife Eliza is presiding, and alongside his desk, a tripod table with a writing box on top. His burgeoning library in bookcases either side. Next, please. In these details, you can see on the left the windows of the lower office just above the net curtains, and above those a large vertical window. It seems the upper office is built against the back wall and has a flat roof. On the right, a rare, in fact perhaps the only glimpse of Soane himself at work, seen from the back. Even at the tea table, he's studying an architectural drawing. Next, please. This is a modern plan showing 3 houses, 12, 13 and 14, as they were in around 1810. In 1807, Soane purchased number 13 Lincoln's Inn Fields, the house next door to his first home at number 12. And at that point, he redeveloped the rear premises, pulling down a stable block on the site. Here you can see what resulted. His L-shaped house, 12 on the left, with an extension across the back of 13. His old office at the back of number 12 has become a study, and he has built a new upper and lower office where the colonnade is today in the museum, outlined in red on this plan. You can see that the stairs to the upper office are behind the east wall of the dome area. They're within the red oval, running north-south. We have no views or plans of that upper office at this early date, but the office that survives today is in the location indicated here. In 1812, Soane pulled down the front part of number 13, the middle house shown here, and rebuilt it, connecting it to the new area at the back, the dome area and the office. He moved into number 13 in 1813 and blocked off and rented out his old home at number 12. Next, please. In 1812, we get our first glimpse of his upper office at the back of number 13, with desks each side, as in this drawing. An arch is just visible behind the top of the desks, indicating that the office is a space within another space, and there is a glimpse of a skylight top left. Even at this point, it amuses me to note that the office was being used on occasion as a store. You can see 2 disassembled Kent tables stacked under the desks. Next, please. Next, please. Top left here, you can see a detail of that drawing showing the 2 long casts of unidentified Renaissance ornament hung or placed on a ledge above each other on a ledge on the wall. The upper one is still in the office today, and you can see it below left, restored. Perched on these casts are 3 small models for attics at the Bank of England, just the sort of models that must have been routinely passing through the office as Soane developed alternative designs to show to clients. To the left in the detail, you can see 3 small models, the facade of the Soane Museum in the centre, the Royal College of Surgeons to the right, and number 15 Lincoln's Inn Fields, which had a projecting porch on the left. These little models are 3 that were made to support Soane's case when he was taken to court over the facade of his museum in 1812. 2 do not survive, but one, the small facade model for number 13, is still in the collection and is now back on show in the office, as you can see in the image on the right, displayed as it was at the time of Soane's death on the east wall. Next image, please. Soane's offices behind number 13 were remodelled extensively in 1818 when the lower office was converted into additional display space, as you see here, probably required as a consequence of Soane's extensive purchases of antiquities and casts at the Adam sale in that year. This image gives a glimpse of how the office furniture, storing books and drawings, was retained in the area, and the objects were slotted in around it when it became part of the museum. Next, please. The upper office was modified again in 1821 when the roof was raised and the access staircase moved to the east end. This drawing, wonderful little sketch, and it's very, very small, it's on the back of another drawing, is what you might describe as a concept sketch in Soane's own hand from around that time, I think. Very exciting because it represents the architect capturing the idea of the upper office as a space within a space in his own hand. The office is essentially a platform with desks each side, and here you can see those desks looking like square blocks perched on top of columns in the centre. The sketch shows the way the space is lit from above through two skylights. They're shown here as lean-to structures, not triangular as they later became and as they remain today. The light through these skylights would fall not only onto the desks, but also down past the office to each side of the platform to light the spaces below, just as it still does today. From 1821 onwards, the upper office looked, in fact, very much as it does today. Next image, please. This is the only view of the office that we actually have from Soane's lifetime, drawn by Joseph Michael Gandy, who was briefly an assistant in Soane's office and afterwards worked for him for more than 30 years as a freelance perspective artist. The view is part of a large composite sheet featuring a number of watercolours of different rooms in the museum. And this view is drawn as if it's on a piece of drawing paper, partially rolled up at the bottom and curling over at the top left. The view looks from the top of a staircase leading up to the office towards the dome area. You can see a glimpse of that through an aperture at the far end, just between the two desks. The long frieze we looked at earlier in the drawing from 1812 is above that aperture in the position it occupies today. This view shows the essentials of the space as we can see it now, a platform with mahogany desks each side and sort of floating in a way within the larger volume of the museum. And just on the right, you can see the drop down behind the desks into the museum below. You can also incidentally see the detail of a single tie bar running from the office structure to the solid back wall of the building. Our structural engineer breathed a huge sigh of relief when he saw that and was even more delighted when I was able to show him that it had been there since the beginning by giving him a copy of this drawing. Above are triangular skylights, allowing that good north light to fall onto the desks. And you can also see just detail, since that first 1812 view, many additional drawers and cupboards have been built in under the desktops. Many of the works of art shown in this view remain in the same positions today. Next, please. Among them is a large decorative bracket circled in red on the left in the detail from the Gandy watercolour. Top right is another watercolour of the same bracket. This is the complete image from a volume of drawings by Soane's pupil C.J. Richardson, which survives in the British Library. The volume was rediscovered a few years ago by Bianca de Divitis. This drawing dates from the 1820s, shows the same bracket close up, clearly in situ against the panelled wall of the office. And lower right, you see the same bracket in situ today, actually before we did the restoration project. You'll notice the much warmer tone of the panelling in the Gandy view on the left and the watercolour top right. When we took objects down for conservation, we found examples of this early warm cedar colour, you might call it, on the walls. But our paint research revealed that by the time of Soane's death, the walls were much lighter, and you'll see later on that they've been repainted in that lighter colour. These three images, I think, really illustrate just how accurate the records that we have of the office from Soane's day, even though they're so little, how accurate they are, with the ledge behind that bracket that creates a kind of shadow gap, the detail of the ornament, and even the construction of the cast, which is a plaster cast mounted within an L-shaped timber bracket, accurately recorded. Next, please. The Gandhi view also shows arrangements that don't survive because they were later dismantled. Here in the centre of the ceiling, you can see a wooden rosette in a dark brown mahogany colour a wooden rosette on an octagonal backboard mounted on a dark mahogany coloured domical form. That's another detail from the 1822 watercolour on the left. On the right, you can see that rosette in the centre of the drawing office ceiling as it looks today, no longer mounted on that dome form. The first museum inventories of 1837 demonstrate that by the time of Soane's death, this arrangement had been altered and the dome model had moved to the east side of the office, where it was apparently displayed below a freestanding model and supporting a large vase. I just mentioned briefly that in the very centre of that wooden dome form is a screw hole, which was obviously used when the rosette was fixed to it. Next, please. I mentioned that when that dome form was moved at the end of Soane's life, it supported a vase. That vase, which was museum number M1286, is sadly missing today, probably broken at some point after Soane's death. As part of ongoing work to try to identify missing objects, I discovered an image of it just last month. You can see that top left, after we'd completed the drawing office. It somehow rang a bell in my mind. I knew I'd just seen it before somewhere in association with that dome form. And then it came to me in engravings of our basement anteroom made in preparation for the 1835 description. And there it is in the centre. You can see the dome form is on a shelf supported by two what look like metal uprights, the vase on top, and a model above. I think this engraving shows the very arrangement that was later moved right at the end of Soane's life up to the office and placed against the east wall, where it would fit the numbering sequence perfectly. And in the right-hand photograph, you can see the space there to the left of the bronzed railings, just waiting for these objects to be dropped into place in their original position. So I hope that's a future enhancement to the office that we'll be able to make, perhaps commissioning a copy of this lost vase. Next, please. There's another item that the wonderful surviving Gandhi watercolour has enabled us to identify. On the left, you can see it ringed, a cast of a scarab hieroglyph from the Egyptian obelisk that today stands in Piazza del Popolo in Rome. Soane's example is lost. In fact, he had two. The one in the office was missing by 1906, probably broken, and the other one is also no longer to be found. However, there is one in the Thorvaldsen collection in Denmark, seen top right, and with their help, we're going to acquire a copy for the office, where the original fixing is still in the wall, as you can see in the pre-restoration photo, lower right. It's just tucked in just to the left of where the two scaffolding poles cross. Next, please. There was one further major alteration to the office made by Soane after the time that Gandhi drew his view in 1822. In 1824 to 25, Soane rebuilt number 14 Lincoln's Inn Fields, the third house in the row of Soane houses on the north side of the square. And in doing so, he created the museum corridor outside the picture room at the back of the house, shown here. And he used that corridor, the north end of it anyway, to construct a new staircase up to the office, which you can see here. This narrow staircase, which is not wide enough for two people to pass each other, is still the only access route to the drawing office today. Next, please. 54 men worked in Soane's office as pupils, clerks, or assistants in the years between 1784 and Soane's death in 1837, 6 days a week, initially from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in the summer and 8 till 8 in the winter. After 1810, this changed to 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. standard. It's a very long day. Most were pupils articled for 5 years for a £157 premium. They were usually aged 16, just teenagers, and their articles show that Soane undertook to educate them in the, quote, art, profession, and business of architecture. They would have arrived every morning at the back door, the office door, onto Whetstone Park, and that for the surviving office would have been the central door in the left-hand group of openings in the rear wall, seen in the view at the top of this slide, showing the back facade of the museum. They entered through that door and found themselves pretty much directly at the foot of the stairs up to the office. As they reached the top of the stairs, they were greeted by, what else? A model of the 4 orders of classical architecture on a balustrade. You can see that bottom left. And this is the restored office. And I rather like the humour, at least I think it's a touch of humour, of placing these very formal classical orders on a balustrade supported by a sort of alternative, more whimsical form of column, these sort of twisted barley sugar fragments of balustrade. Next to those orders, if you look at the lower right-hand image, you can see there is a full-size model of one of Soane's own inventive neoclassical orders, his own riff on those Roman and Greek precedents, in the form of a large grey-coloured pilaster capital for the Bank of England. Next, please. Once the pupils were up in the office, they worked sitting at the long mahogany desks built probably from salvaged elements of the previous office at number 12, perhaps using stools, but probably more likely standing with that good north light falling onto their drawing boards. They worked under the watchful eye of the Roman Emperor Lucius Verus, the cast of whose face on the north wall you can see in the top right image here. It's the only human presence in the office, and he's very much in the centre of the wall, and I think he really does seem to preside. It wasn't anything I'd thought of before we finished our restoration, but it's very striking. And I looked up this obscure emperor who ruled from 161 to 169 Common Era, and I discover that he was famously said to have been a good student. There's always meaning in Soane's arrangements. Railed apertures at the pupils' feet, as seen bottom right, enabled heat from Soane's innovative central heating system to circulate without the need for a fireplace, the key to the viability of the inventive form of the office, and incidentally, enabling every word they said to be heard from the museum below, an incentive to disciplined, quiet work, particularly when you think that Soane's own little study was just a few steps away on the ground floor. Next slide, please. When pupils arrived each morning, their names were entered into the office daybook, and what they did each day was recorded there. This is a typical opening showing the 2 days, Saturday the 19th and Monday the 21st of February, 1825. It's a page for each day. Top left, the times each pupil arrived. Naughty Birchall was 5 minutes late on both days. And then below, the book records what each of them was working on, each entry signed with the name of the relevant pupil. You can see that on both days, C.J. Richardson is drawing a section of the Court of Chancery, and on the right-hand page, we have David McCatter, noted as busy with the bank, about accounts. I single out McCatter because he was a Jewish pupil in the office of Soane, and you'll notice his name doesn't appear on the left-hand page. That's because that is a Saturday, and he was not expected to work on Saturdays, the Jewish Shabbat, which seems very enlightened. The day books provide an unparalleled record of the business of a professional architect's office in the early 19th century, and we have an almost unbroken run of them for 45 years. They record all the usual business of the office, with pupils producing endless copies of drawings, either by pricking through the outlines onto new sheets of paper below, or perhaps tracing them, changing the drawings as they went to incorporate Soane's scrawled corrections as his designs evolved. They also ran errands, received deliveries, went on site visits, mounted and framed drawings for Royal Academy exhibitions, entered accounts, and wrote out invoices. Next slide, please. During their studies in Soane's office, the pupils were expected to study draftsmanship skills. The records show that some of them were sent to classes at the Royal Academy or even to private tutors. And the day books record them on regular occasions doing exercises such as drawing shadows, which involve casting strong shadows onto arrangements in the museum, using lamps or candles and drawing the effect. And on the left here seems to be one of those very drawings by George Underwood, drawn on January the 30th, 1811, with light clearly deliberately shone onto this cinerary vase and urn to create dramatic shadows. Intriguingly, and you can see this on the right, we found evidence during our restoration that sometimes these exercises may have gone wrong. This cast of a section of egg and dart moulding has clearly been accidentally burnt. There's never been a recorded fire in the office area. Perhaps a naked flame got too close during a drawing exercise, excuse me. Next slide, please. The casts hanging on the walls of the office represented a repertoire of architectural ornament that was not only referred to for design work, but also used for further exercises in draftsmanship, fostering familiarity with all the orders, the elements of classical architecture, as shown by these two studies. On the left, a foliate panel with a putto in the center, a cast from a Roman candelabrum, and on the right, a meticulous drawing of an individual leaf. Next, please. Soane also commissioned his pupils to record the evolution of the interiors of his own house museum. Several hundred views survive today, of which these two are just a glimpse. On the left of the monk's parlour window by Stephen Birchall in 1825, and on the right of the lobby to the breakfast room by C.J. Richardson in 1826. And I include these two in particular because not only are they exercises in precise draftsmanship and watercolour technique, but over the last 30 years, studied in conjunction with a wealth of other evidence in Soane's archives, they've played a seminal role in the restoration of his museum. Next, please. Soane's pupils were kept busy with other exercises too, learning the process of construction through the careful making of progress drawings on site, for example. The extensive use of this in architectural training was something unusual, possibly even unique to the Soane office. Here on the left, a rare glimpse of one of the pupils drawn by another, perched on a plank with his sketchbook, sitting on a handkerchief and drawing the scene. Top right, you can see a view of Dulwich Picture Gallery, showing the timber floor joists exposed and the ceiling structure under construction, and lower right, another pupil's view of the roof of the Bank of England, showing the wooden formwork for Soane's arches, and in the foreground, one of his roofs partially constructed using the hollow pot bricks specially made for the purpose in kilns on the site. Next, please. Soane's pupils also produced the more than 1,000 watercolour lecture drawings required to illustrate his Royal Academy lectures between his appointment as Professor of Architecture in 1806 and his death. Some of these are more than 6 feet in length. You can see where they needed such long drawing tables. A group of pupils was sent off to survey Stonehenge in 1817, and Henry Park produced this beautiful drawing dated the 23rd of September. I absolutely love the sheep clambering on the stones, the wonderful late summer light, as well as the glimpse of a pupil surveying the stones, having climbed up on top of one of the triglyphs from a ladder and shown in the act of dropping a plumb line. Next, please. I couldn't resist putting in this detail as it's probably the most close-up depiction we have of any of Soane's pupils, this unknown young man sitting and sketching that scene. Next, please. Henry Park, who drew that Stonehenge view, was a particularly talented draftsman and was invited to accompany his master on a 10-day trip to Paris in September 1819, during which he made the sketches for a series of wonderful lecture drawings, of which 2 are shown here. At the top, the Canal de l'Orque, and below a view over the city from the cemetery of Père Lachaise. Park was such an outstanding pupil that when he left Soane's office, Soane gave him a gift of £100, which enabled him to travel to Italy, Sicily, Greece, and Egypt between 1820 and 1824. Another of Soane's pupils, George Bailey, became so much a part of Soane's working life and museum that he was nominated in his will to be the first curator of the museum, a post he held until his death in 1860, overseeing the museum for 23 years after Soane's death. Next, please. In working on the restoration of the office, we had to clear out the drawers and cupboards that once brimmed with Soane's drawings. Amongst the items we found were several quills, worn and stained with ink, lurking in the back of a drawer, a tangible reminder of all those young men who laboured in the office, and I think amongst the most evocative and moving items I've ever encountered in the museum. Particularly so because we know so little of the pupils' lives outside the office. We don't even know what breaks they were given or where they had lunch, nothing about their lodgings or whether they still lived with their families indeed. The one thing we do know is that there was strict demarcation between them and Soane's servants, and that they were not allowed to fraternise with them or go to the kitchens. Next slide, please. Soane's office, and here you see it restored in all its glory, is probably the only architect's office to survive from before the late 19th century, and is one of the most important spaces in the museum, largely unaltered since it was used by Soane and his pupils. Its design was novel and ingenious, quote, at the time, and its form has inspired architects across the world. Just as the restoration of the private apartments brought Mrs. Soane back into focus, so we hope the restoration of the office will bring Soane's working life back to the fore. And I was very touched to take Soane's biographer, Gillian Darley, up to the office earlier this week. And she got quite emotional and said that this was a space where she felt so vividly all that work and effort and rigour of Soane's office, and it just brought everything to life. All our projects have as their starting point that requirement that we keep the museum as it was at the time of Soane's death. Only by honouring that and getting the arrangements of objects as he had them does the museum make sense and have meaning. So the restoration of this space has followed on logically from previous restorations, and it's the last space in the building to be restored and opened, meaning that now, with this final restoration, every area that was open to visitors at the end of Soane's life and when the museum first opened is open again today. Next slide. Before we even started the work, research was a crucial element, which I carried out, looking at the history of the space and especially the arrangements of works of art. And I just wanted to give you a very quick glimpse of that. The sources included the early inventories, 1906 diagrams of the layout of works of art. You can see one top left, showing the south wall of the office, and photographs. And lower right is actually the only photograph we have from before the Second World War, 1910. And one thing I particularly love is that it shows the boxes containing Soane's archive of business papers with their handles for carrying still in situ under the office desks. Although the documents are now safely in our archives, The boxes are now back in the office. The study of the number sequences of works of art helped to reveal that the shelf you can see in this view across the far wall was not present at the time of Soane's death. It cut across areas where we could prove particular objects had hung, and its modernity was confirmed by our paint research. It had no early layers on it. The restoration took a long time, a full year. There were various phases, beginning with the rehousing of the 500 items that were actually on or in the drawers, and on the desk or in the drawers, mostly fragments from our building archive. Next slide, please. The work began with the first job being to take down all the casts, more than 200, prior to their conservation. The taking down of the works of art revealed that many were still nailed up with their original long hand-forged nails and had never been taken off the wall since being hung by Soane. I must say that brilliantly, those long nails were prized out of the wall, taken out of the objects, straightened, kept with the objects, and reused a year later to refix the objects using the original holes. Absolutely amazing work on the part of our sculpture conservators, Taylor Pierce Restoration. You can see how we've labelled every fixing as the objects have come down. You can see the pieces of bare wood, and you can see some of that earlier, much darker wool colour and the most recent grey colour, and in between darker grey, where an object has obviously been hung in the office after Soane's death, a later date, but prior to the most modern paint surface. Next slide, please. More than 200 casts were cleaned, took a year, with the work divided between our own conservators and Taylor Pierce Restoration. The vast majority were cleaned with spit using cotton swabs. It's incredibly effective. Spit, swipe, throw, over and over again. It takes about 12 hours to clean even just a small cast. This slide illustrates the transformation achieved, and we've left just one corner of this cast of the side of a Roman chariot in the Vatican museums, dirty, so that visitors can see the difference. Next slide, please. This detail, taken before the project, shows two trapezoid panels in situ on the west wall with grey frames contrasting with the cream surface of the casts themselves. Our paint research revealed that, bizarrely, this grey highlighting of the frames was very recent, dating from the redecoration that took place in 1970. And every single earlier layer showed cream colour on both casts and frames. Next slide, please. Here we see that same wall rehung. You can see the four trapezoid panels, 6 now actually, in place, their surfaces cleaned, and the frames are now painted to match the casts. That's really the one dramatic change that we made during the restoration, and I think it's really brought everything together most beautifully. You can also see a number of wooden models on that far wall, all of which are now back in their original positions after more than 100 years of absence. Next slide, please. The walls and ceiling have been redecorated their original colour, much lighter than shown in the Gandhi watercolour. The desks have been beautifully restored by our cabinet maker, Peter Holmes, carefully removing the dirt, repairing broken drawer bottoms, and replacing missing numbers and handles, but not removing the patina of age, which makes this such a special place. And large models have been replaced on the desks where they stood at the time of Soane's death. Next slide, please. This is a model of the Governor's Court at the Bank of England. Soane had an office at the bank. We don't know much about it, but when it closed in 1833, we think these big models came back to Lincoln's Inn Fields and were displayed here in our upper office. Next slide, please. More than 60 works of art came out of store to go back in the office. And here I show you just 2 wooden models for ceilings at the law courts. They came out of the store and they just dropped back onto their original fixings, which were still in the wall with nothing on them. Next slide. And here, top right, you see a small Roman antefix. We were absolutely baffled as to how this object would fit into its correct numbering sequence, because it had no holes for any fixings, until we realized there was a little ledge at the top of the wall. Thank goodness we'd labeled every fixing "do not remove" at the start of the project, as two apertures in the back of the object just slid neatly over two really horrid and unpromising looking prongs of metal projecting from the wall. Wonderful. So that object too is now back in its correct position. Next slide, please. I just put in a few final images to illustrate the work that we carried out under the office, where you can see on the right, there is a series of timber columns. They required quite complex structural work. As you can see in that right-hand engraving, the upper two columns have a triangular shape. This is as they were at the time of Soane's death. Next slide, please. After his death, they were altered. As you can see in the plan on the left here, you can see it shows before and after. On the left, as those columns looked at the time of Soane's death, down at the bottom of the plan, you can see those two triangular columns. On the right, after the columns had been moved apart by about a foot, and those triangular columns made square. We have turned them back again. Next slide, please. And by doing so, we've been able to put back a stained glass screen, which you can see top center in the left-hand plan here, and is the left hand of the two illustrated on the right. And while we were about it, we've put back a second stained glass screen on a cupboard in an adjacent area. Next slide. And these are those two screens in the architect's drawing for the project. I haven't got photographs of them in situ because we haven't taken them yet. So I thought, well, I'll show you anyway. And there is something to lure you over to Lincoln's Inn Fields to see them in reality. Could I have the next slide, please? This is my final image, and I'm ending with a drawing of a fragment in the office made by the artist John Madison a few years ago, a reminder that it continues to inspire artists and architects. And this inspiration is what underpins our plans for the future of the restored office. Access is limited, just that little staircase, no way to introduce disabled access. We are already having regular public tours, but for very small groups. We had a wonderful open day for the public last Monday, at which 70 people were able to see this space. But from now on, it will be probably less than 20 people a week will be able to see it, unless they make special arrangements. It's just so tiny, and it's right in the heart of a very busy museum. So the digital outcomes from this project are going to be very important. We've already scanned the space, and that will enable people to explore it from wherever they are in the world via our Explore Soane platform on our website from this September. The day books have all been digitized, and they will also be launched online later this year. And the drawings made by Soane's pupils have provided the inspiration for artist residencies, which have already begun. We had 960 applicants for our first two residencies, and our first resident, Sam Belinfante, is already working at the museum. The residencies have drawing at the heart of their specification, drawing in its broadest sense, used by artists in all media, and Sam is a sound and performance artist. I hope that those residents will feel that in some way, like Soane's pupil, Edward Davis, they're able to say that Soane's office has given them, quote, a passport for life. Thank you very much.
Helen, thank you so much. I have to say that I thought I knew a lot about the drawing office, but you showed me how little I knew. This is really wonderful. You brought it to life and showing the passion and endless research and spelunking that went into getting it all back together the way it was when Soane left it when he died is really an amazing, such an incredible effort that you and your colleagues put into this. And I also see, by the way, that we at the foundation were proud to raise money for the for this restoration. And I never understood totally where it all went. I thought, I know it's really complicated, but your your lecture has shown me how incredibly complicated it was and why it really was such a long and expensive process.
That's absolutely right, Paul. It's such a constricted space, and even putting up scaffolding both sides of the office to take objects down just took so long, so carefully done. And yeah, it's just a very complex project, although it's in such a tiny area.
Right. Well, and I have to say, we're recording this and we're going to put this up on our website as soon as we can, and presumably you might do the same thing at the museum. And I think that this lecture is going to be very inspirational. Your lecture is going to be very inspirational for artists and students and our foundation fellows to sort of think about why this would be such an important place to work. And why it's so unique, and it gave us so much to think about. So we do have some questions that have come up, but I just wanted to ask you something a little bit outside of the drawing office to start out, and that is that I've always been very intrigued by the title of inspectress and your title. And can you just talk briefly about the history of that title, which you have? And to me, it implies a title of a job that really changed over the years. And knowing everything that you've done, you go way beyond what I think of and what an inspectress might be. I would love to hear a little bit about the history of the term and the history of your position.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Paul. Well, the inspectress was a title that Soane thought up himself.
Right.
He had a housekeeper who was a family friend who came to help him after his wife died. And at the time of his death, he nominated her to be the first inspectress of the museum. And we're not quite sure why he chose that title, except it obviously sounded more professional and museum-y than housekeeper. But we think it might have come from the Foundling Hospital, where there was an inspectress who looked after the foundlings. So maybe Soane saw his collection as being left, orphaned after his death. And Sally Conduit, the first inspectress, was to care for it. And I think that the evolution from housekeeper to inspectress tells you what the job was meant to be. It was always meant to look after the house and its contents. And that's why the inspectress has continued to do that until the present day. And I still fulfill that role. I still look after the house and the collection. And I think I don't do some of the things that former inspectresses did. The very famous one, Dorothy Stroud, known to some people as the Shroud, who was inspectress from 1945 to 1984. And she famously looked after the cat, wrote a biography of Soane, and made curtains and mended cushions and did all sorts of practical things that are beyond me. So she was really marvelous, and that was very much the pattern, that the inspectresses just turned their hand to whatever needed to be done. And the thing I'm most proud of is that Soane's setup has ensured that this museum has had a woman as its deputy director essentially since 1837. I think that's amazing, and I am strongly of the opinion that any future inspector should in fact self-identify as an inspectress and continue the title on into the future.
I love that. I have to say, and we're very lucky that through such an important time in the history of the museum, when so much of it was opened up, that you were the inspectress to guide the museum to get it back to what it was originally. I'm fascinated that over the years, individuals took it on themselves to change things according to what the present style might have been, like in the 70s, adding a darker frame because somebody thought that sort of made those pictures pop or whatever. And how all of that takes a place like this, which is meant to be a record of a very important time and a very important architect, and brings it further away from what it was originally.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, Paul, because certainly when I started, almost the first thing I was told by Peter Thornton, who was a great pioneer of authentic restoration, was this is something quite new, and you do not apply your own taste to Sir John Soane's museum. I mean, of course you do. You have to sometimes, occasionally, you have to make judgments, but it was really very interesting to be part of that process.
Right. I'm fascinated also at how important the drawings were. This incredible collection of drawings, some of them done by Gandy and by others, in the restoration. And do you know, was this really extraordinary? Did Soane have a passion for having everything recorded in drawings that was unusual for an architect in the 19th century? Because it's so lucky that we have them. We wouldn't be able to do what you're doing.
No, I think it is very unusual. I mean, we've got more than 500 drawings, plans, elevations for the museum during Soane's day. That's exceptional. And I can only think it was possibly because he always had various publications in mind, possibly because he was thinking of exercises for those pupils, and sending them, just down the stairs to do that was a bit easier and quicker than sending them out to draw other buildings. I'm not really sure, but it certainly is a really fascinating aspect of the collection. And they drew hundreds of views of objects as well.
And I think it also shows that to Soane, there was those wonderful drawings of buildings under construction, which showed that the way that buildings came together was very important to him. The construction techniques were important, but also that the exact way that he decided to display objects was also important, or maybe even more important. And the effort that he made into doing elevations and perspectives that showed exactly how everything was displayed and was to be displayed, I think is inspirational to me and to architects and maybe to interior designers, in terms of, interiors are so fleeting and they can change so easily. And how the fact that John Soane created all these drawings to record every step of the various ideas that he had for displays are so important today for us to learn about the way he thought about his collection and the way he thought about history.
Absolutely. And it's undoubtedly true. And I don't think it's just me, that when you put things back where he had them, they make sense and they suddenly have meaning. And where they're just the result of some curator tinkering about at some point, they're not really terribly interesting.
Yes.
In a way, the house is a three-dimensional version of Soane's Royal Academy lectures. And that's what makes it so endlessly fascinating, I think, because it's the mind of a genius on display before your eyes.
Wonderful. Now, Bill, are there some questions that we want to bring up?
Yeah. Well, one is a sort of a candid question to you, Helen. It's a two-parter. First off is, as you see, Paul and I have great envy for location, but could you tell us a little bit more about where you are?
Oh, I'm in my office, which is at the top of number 14 Lincoln's Inn Fields. And that's the third building that Soane bought and rebuilt. But after his death, it was sold. We got it back in the 1990s. And it's now like a bit of an aqua lung, enabling us to get all our administrative functions out of the number 13 house and into this one.
And you mentioned go ahead, Paul.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think that your offices and all the staff offices at the Soane are, to me, some of the most interesting places to visit because of the pictures that you have on the walls that indicate what's important to you about the museum and the history of the time that you've spent working at the museum. So sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say the same, just that we have a sense in America and in museums here of the importance of office and location. And just sort of interested to the earlier question about the inspectress, is this an office that someday, may that day not come soon, you will hand on to whoever replaces you?
I guess so, Bill. I'll have to do that. I don't know how I will do it.
Don't move out.
But yeah, and you'll see, I think on my mantelpiece I've got about 3 items relating to the foundation, in fact, and I have not put them there just for today.
Oh, thank you.
I've got a couple of your wonderful invitations,
Old
and
invitations,
award
yes, I
that was given
recognize
to
them.
Margaret, and all sorts of things. So you're
Wonderful.
right here in the office with me.
Yay. Wonderful.
We so appreciate that, and we really appreciate the great fortune of the timing working out, because you've had this great opening, and we're so honored to be able to present your talk to our audiences. But I have to tell you, many of your colleagues are on the call right now, and although it isn't a question, I got a nice message from your partner, the director, who said, thank you for the illuminating talk, and what a pleasure it is to work with you these years together. As Paul and I have come to feel, it's such an honor, this partnership that we have with the museum, and your history there is, as Paul said earlier, just remarkable. I mean, do you have an archive that will be passed on through the museum?
I've got a bit of an archive, and I shall definitely write something about my time at the museum before I leave here. And I've already written things about different aspects of it, and I try to make notes as I go along, because those of us who've been at the museum for 30+ years, and there are 3 of us, we are in a way the last link to the days of Summerson and Stroud, the time when there was no photocopier, when there was a cat roaming about, in the museum. And I was very moved recently to read some accounts of the museum from the 1920s, and some of those wrote about Soane as if he'd only just left the room. Old Sir
Wonderful.
John did this, or something, that sort of thing. And it just makes one think of all these links that go back through history, and how incredibly moving that is. And it's very present in this building.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
One of the things that I learned today is that this is, I always think of the museum as a place that's about great architecture, it's about collecting, it's about pedagogy. But you describing the book that with all that over 45 years recorded every detail that happened in the office, remarkable, because it's also the history of the details of how an architectural office worked in the 19th century, and I'm sure that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world.
I don't think so. And in fact, one of our next projects is to produce a book on the office, on Soane's office, publishing the work of our former director, Margaret Richardson, which has sort of been come out some years ago in sort of conference proceedings and things like that, but deserves to be much more widely read, and publishing something about this restoration. But those day books really are extraordinary, and they're also in many cases the key to understanding the 9,000 Soane drawings that we have in our collection.
Right.
Because of course you can cross-reference by date. If a drawing is dated, you can look up the day book and see who drew it, and you can also see how long it took them.
Right. And Helen, another thing that stood out to me is the drawings done by students of Soane for him to use in his lectures, which I found fascinating. Sort of, we think of these as when I was younger, they used slides, now they're digital images, of course. That the idea that he would essentially create the posters essentially to hold up in front of his students. Is there has there been an exhibit or a book perhaps on those drawings that showed how those images were made and how he used them as a tool in teaching?
There's an amazing book on Soane's lectures by Professor David Watkin, which publishes a lot of the drawings.
Oh, wonderful. I should know that. I didn't know it.
It's a wonderful book, but it doesn't publish them all, sadly, because there are more than 1,000. But they are all on our website, amongst our drawings in collections online. And there's certainly more to be said and more to be published in the sense of making the watercolors accessible. I think David's is pretty much the last word on the content of the lectures, which Soane wrote and then redrafted and drafted again and corrected again, because he gave them over a period of 30 years.
Yeah, I think that, boy, I would love to see a lecture on the lectures that would really concentrate on the images, and especially since, as you said, there are new images being discovered by, I think you mentioned somebody's images were discovered fairly recently that of Soane interiors and perhaps some of Soane lectures that haven't been a part of the museum. They were elsewhere.
Yes, there was a volume in the British Library, not of lecture drawings actually, but views of the museum that was discovered. And, you know, we always see something new whenever we look at these things. So there's always something new to say.
Wonderful.
Bill, I was going to say maybe as a final question or two, but speaking of what's new, and not to steal the thunder of upcoming work at the museum, but can you share anything, Helen, that is around the corner that's very exciting news for our passionate audience that's still with us?
Well, I think, you know, we're moving away from building restoration, Bill, and probably back to certainly in my team, more care of the collections. And I think our next really major project is going to be the restoration of our Hogarth's Rake's Progress, which is one of our greatest treasures, the 8 paintings dating from 1754. It's going to be a major fundraising effort for us. And the pictures will, we hope, be a revelation once they've been cleaned. The work has to be done because, as you know, canvases only last a certain length of time. And those canvases and their 19th century relinings are coming to the end of their life. So they need urgent work. But cleaning has to be done when you reline. So we're hoping for a really magnificent result. And there are lots of other things happening too, not least the launch of the Drawing Office scan, the launch of the day books, another Soane medal later this autumn, all under wraps at the moment, and other exhibitions coming up too. We're just about to open a show on architects' houses, featuring a number of very significant architects' houses from the 20th century, and an exhibition of ceramics by Bouke de Vries, a sort of riff on the Rake's Progress, all opening next week.
Well, that's fantastic.
We're definitely ready to come for the tour of the architects' homes. So I look forward to that opportunity. Good. And thank you so much, Paul. Final words. We're so excited for today. And thank you for setting up our next talk, as Paul mentioned, on June 15th. And everyone who is with us today will receive information about that very soon. So we hope you all can join us. And I'll turn it back over to Paul for our final words. Thank you so much, Helen.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. And Helen, thank you so much for joining us today. And I have to say that when I go to the museum and I'm in London, you're one of the people that I always love to see. Because you are so lovely and welcoming, but also because you know so much, and as you've reminded us today. So thank you. And I'm thrilled that we got to introduce you to many people who don't know you and who can now see all the valuable work that you've been doing at the museum. And we look forward to more. So
thank
great
you
to
very
see you,
much,
Helen.
Paul. It's been a pleasure.